Now, just try and imagine the most film-crazy young person, somebody who is just punch drunk in love with cinema. Multiply that times 1,000 and keep going, and then you'd have me in my 20s. I somehow had gotten a job at a company called New Yorker Films in New York City. And when I started there, on the very first day, the phone rang and somebody said, Bertolucci on line 2. And I could not believe that the director of The Conformist was suddenly someone real, somebody I might meet, somebody I might even get to know. All these kinds of things were suddenly possible now that I worked at this company. So on this particular day, I get a call from some guy, and he says, I'm calling on behalf of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. She would like to see your film La Soufriere. I said, oh, that's fine. I'll set up a screening for you. But I'm curious, why does she want to see this Werner Herzog film? And he said, well, she was recently on vacation and traveling in Guadeloupe, and she was on La Soufriere, and she heard there was this movie, so she wanted to see it. And I said, oh, that makes sense. And I said, just let me know what's convenient and I'll set it up. After I got off it, I was thinking, well, that's a strange combination. Jackie O and Werner H. Who could be more different than that? But then I thought a little bit more about it. And Werner Herzog is all about the marginal people of this world, people living kind of pushed out of the edges, somebody you wouldn't notice. And that's who he makes stories about. And she, through the insanity of her celebrity, because she was truly the most famous woman in the world at that moment, she really was in a class of one. There was nobody else like her. And I think it must be hard to be like that. You're never left alone. And I kind of felt, well, it might make sense to be in a place like La Soufriere where there isn't anybody. Werner needs to go to places where nobody's around. She also needed to do that. La Grande Soufriere is the tallest mountain on the island of Basse-Terre in the cluster of islands that is Guadeloupe, and it has an active volcano. And when it was set to blow in 1976, the entire island was evacuated, but reports came out that one man refused to go. And recognizing a kind of kindred spirit, Herzog, with his typical fearlessness, went there to talk to him. He did interview this guy and two others that he found there, and he filmed the spookily empty streets, and he and his crew, including my friend, cameraman Eddie Lockman, journeyed up to the open mouth of the volcano. And I don't know what Mrs. Onassis had heard about this film, but I knew that she was going to get her money's worth. The famous line from the movie that Herzog said was, "We had to decide if the cinema was more important than life, or if life was more important than the cinema." It was one of those two. And you can guess which one he picked. On the day of the screening, she showed up right on time with her two friends, and I led them into the screening room. And something happened that was seriously strange. The doorman of the building, I hadn't noticed this, had followed them up in the elevator, and he was walking behind me. And he just went into the screening room and went right in front of her, like stood right in front of her and just stared at her. And he was like he was a zombie. He was frozen. He couldn't move. He was paralyzed by her fame. So I just kind of escorted him out of there, and didn't seem to faze her at all. And she just started talking to me about how beautiful Guadeloupe was and how excited she was to see the film and thanked me for setting this up. And what struck me is she had this fluttery little girl's voice. And I didn't remember ever having heard her voice before. I mean, I always had just seen her in photographs and just this kind of regal posture. I'd seen her as the way she looked. And in Andy Warhol paintings, she was an icon. But as a human being, she was talking in this very girlish way, and she had this odd accent.
For instance, I wanted to take my daughter to the circus last week, and I decided I just shouldn't because I would ruin it for her. I worked so hard to make her little ballet school a private thing that we could do together. And there were all the photographers waiting when we got there.
Maybe it was what you would call Bouvier if you were a fan of Grey Gardens. But I guess people who would hear this now, who would see her now, they would go, oh, she's just doing an imitation of Natalie Portman. But it was something that completely shocked me and surprised me at the time. It wasn't a very long film, and so I went in later and turned off the projector and turned on the lights. And then she was just very eager to talk to me about the film and very enthusiastic and asking me questions about Werner Herzog. Mr. Herzog seems like a very interesting man. I wish I could tell you what she really said. And I could say, how could I remember? It was decades ago. The truth is, even 30 seconds after I talked to her, I wouldn't have been able to say anything because she was goddamn freaking Jackie O. And the only thing that was going on is that she was staring directly into my eyes from inches away and giving me her undivided attention. And I was pretty spellbound by her. And I just was very happy to be there. And then she said, Reed, is it okay if we have our lunch here? And I said, sure. And they put their brown bags out and they went and had a picnic on the floor of the New Yorker Film screening room. And I thought, wow, if you're that famous, you can't just do what normal people do. You can't go into a coffee shop and get yourself a BLT. You know, it would create a huge fuss and you'd be on the cover of the Post in no time. You know, you have to make a reservation at a fancy restaurant and be escorted in a back door or whatever. And so they ate on the floor of our screening room. Anyway, it came to be time for her to go. And I was like, wow, that was quite an adventure. And a few days later, a letter arrived. A thank you note from Mrs. Onassis. I guess you could say that she was brought up right. I thought, that's kind of a lot just for setting up a screening, but it was really nice. Now, a lot of people, when they hear a story like this, they'll say, well, do you have the note? No, I don't have the note. There are so many things like that. Like my correspondence with Louise Brooks. I just don't have it. Most of it disappeared somehow because so many things were going on and I was meeting so many people. I didn't really think about collecting knickknacks or souvenirs of what was going on. Now I wish I'd done it, but I didn't keep it. I didn't keep track of stuff and stuff fell off my desk or I don't know what happened. But if I had the note from her, I wouldn't sell it. I would keep it. And then it would just, die with me or would be passed on to one of my relatives. But it's better if I can tell you about that note than for me to actually have the note, because I can tell the story. What really matters is the story. What really matters was the feeling I had meeting her. Thanks for listening. See you next time.